This is a story unlike any other, a story of a woman who never believed in visions, prophecies, or supernatural warnings until she had one herself. Bella was an ordinary 40-year-old woman, a mother, a wife, a business owner. She never considered herself particularly religious, though she believed in God. But everything changed the night she died. It wasn't supposed to happen. One moment, she was living her normal life, and the next, she was somewhere else. What she saw on the other side shook her to the core. A vision of the future, a terrifying truth about a world on the brink of control, and the nations that refused to bow. Bella never imagined death would come for her so suddenly. The day had started like any other. She woke up early, made coffee, and prepared breakfast for her family. The smell of bacon filled the kitchen as she packed lunches for her kids. It was a simple life, a good life. She had worked hard to build her small business, juggling responsibilities as a wife and mother while running a local bakery. But that morning, something felt off. There was a strange pressure in her chest, a tightness she couldn't shake. She brushed it off, assuming she was just exhausted from another long week. "I'll rest later," she thought, sipping her coffee as she glanced at the clock. There was no time to slow down. By noon, the feeling had worsened. A dull ache pulsed down her left arm, creeping into her shoulder. Her breathing grew shallow. Still, she ignored it. She had deliveries to make, customers waiting. Pushing through the discomfort, she loaded boxes of pastries into her car. But as she drove through town, the dizziness hit. The world tilted, the streetlights blurred, and before she could react, everything went dark. When Bella woke up, she wasn't in her car. She wasn't anywhere that made sense. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming silence. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She tried to move, but her body wasn't there. Panic rose inside her, but before she could process what was happening, a light appeared in the distance. Not just any light. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Warm, golden, pulsing with a presence she couldn't explain. It didn't just illuminate, it pulled her toward it. But the sensation of being drawn toward the light wasn't like walking or floating. It was more like being carried by an invisible force. Bella couldn't see her body, yet she existed. She had no hands, no feet, yet she moved. The fear she had felt just moments ago melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. The light enveloped her, surrounding her in a way that felt both comforting and powerful. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but it had a presence, like something or someone was inside it. Then a voice spoke. It wasn't loud, but it filled everything, resonating not just in her ears, but in her very soul. "You have been brought here to see." Bella didn't understand. See what? Was she dead? Was this heaven? Before she could ask, the light shifted, and the world around her changed. Suddenly, she was standing, not physically, but as if her essence had taken form. Before her stretched a vast landscape, unlike anything she had ever known. The sky shimmered with colors she had never seen, hues beyond the human spectrum. The air wasn't air, it was something more, something alive. It carried warmth, love, an unspoken understanding. And then, in the distance, she saw a figure approaching. At first, the figure was too far to make out, but as it came closer, Bella felt her heart, if she even had one in this place, tighten. The presence radiated something indescribable. Authority, yet gentleness. Power, yet peace. She couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, young or old. It was beyond human. The figure stopped a few feet from her and spoke. "You are here for a reason." Bella tried to respond, but words didn't work the way they did on Earth. Instead, her thoughts formed into questions, and instantly the being answered them. "You were chosen to witness what is to come. You must see and return. Tell them. Tell the world." Tell them what? Bella wanted to ask. What was coming? The being lifted a hand, or what looked like a hand. And suddenly, the world around them shifted. Bella was no longer standing in that peaceful place. She was somewhere else, somewhere darker. A city skyline stretched before her, but something was wrong. The streets were filled with people, but their faces were empty, their movements robotic. Signs flashed in a language she didn't recognize, symbols she had never seen before. There was an overwhelming sense of control, of something watching everything, everyone. And then she saw him. In the center of the city, standing on a massive platform, was a man, or at least something that looked like a man. He was speaking, but the crowd wasn't reacting like normal people. They didn't cheer or jeer. They stood in eerie silence, as if they were waiting for instruction. Screens lit up behind him, displaying an emblem Bella had never seen before. It wasn't a government seal, nor a national flag. It was something new, something unsettling. As the figure spoke, Bella felt an overwhelming pressure in the air, a force that demanded submission. It wasn't just a speech, it was a command. But it wasn't from the man himself. It was coming from something much larger, something unseen yet everywhere. Then she saw people lining up. A long, endless line of men, women, and children. Each one approached a station where a metallic device was placed against their foreheads or hands. When it was removed, a glowing mark remained, and those who received it were granted access. Doors opened, barriers lifted, their lives continued without issue. But those who refused. Bella's breath caught as she saw what happened next. People who resisted were turned away, cut off from society. Stores refused to serve them. Banks locked them out. They became invisible, cast out like criminals for simply saying no. And then the vision shifted again. The world around Bella became a mosaic of different nations, flashing before her like a living map. Some countries fully embraced this system, enforcing it on their people with no resistance. Others hesitated but eventually complied, fearing consequences. But then, there were the outliers, the places that refused. She saw leaders of certain nations standing against the wave of control, refusing to implement the mark. Some were ridiculed, some were threatened, but they stood firm. Their people, though struggling, found ways to survive outside the system. They created underground economies, built communities that thrived on faith and trust, rather than digital approval. The voice of the presence echoed once more. There will be those who resist, and they will be tested, but their faith will sustain them. Bella watched in awe as these groups found ways to live outside the grip of control. They shared, they helped one another, they built something new. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. Then suddenly, Bella felt herself being pulled away. The visions blurred, the light faded, and before she could protest, she was back. Back in her body, back in the hospital. Gasps filled the room as doctors and nurses rushed around her. She was alive, and she had a message to share. As Bella's vision continued, she saw a vast, illuminated map of the world, but it wasn't like any map she had seen before. Some countries glowed with a deep golden light, while others were dim, overtaken by the same eerie presence she had felt in the controlled city. She could see borders, not in the way we understand them, but as spiritual lines, some strong and unwavering, others weakened and fading. These are the nations that will refuse, the voice said. Bella could feel a sense of divine protection surrounding these places, as if an unseen force was shielding them. She watched as leaders of these nations stood firm, rejecting the new system. Some spoke openly against it, warning their people of the deception behind it. Others quietly resisted, refusing to enforce the new rules even as global organizations pressured them to comply. Bella saw communities working together to survive without relying on the digital system. Farmers traded food directly, neighbors took care of each other, and underground networks formed to provide for those who had refused the mark. But resistance came at a price. Some of these countries faced economic pressure, their trade agreements cut off. Others faced protests, the media painting them as dangerous, regressive, or a threat to progress. Bella could feel the struggle, the weight of the decision these leaders and their people had made. Yet, despite the hardship, their faith did not waver. "These nations will be a refuge," the voice said. But even here, the test of faith will not be easy. Bella wanted to see more, to understand which countries these were. But before she could focus, the vision shifted again. Now, Bella saw the people, the everyday men, women, and children who had chosen to resist. They were not politicians, not world leaders, but ordinary individuals who had refused to take the mark. Some lived in cities, forced into hidden communities, while others had fled to the countryside, forming small groups that sustained themselves through farming and trade. There was hardship. That much was clear. Those who refused the system were cut off from banks, unable to buy or sell in traditional ways. Hospitals turned them away unless they complied. Schools required registration in the new system, forcing many to homeschool their children. Families were torn apart, some members choosing to take the mark while others refused. And yet, despite all this, Bella saw something she did not expect. These people, despite being exiled from the mainstream world, had something those within the system did not: peace. They sang together, prayed together, and took care of one another. Their faith was not just belief, it was action, a way of life. They trusted that their needs would be met, even if they didn't know how. Bella saw a woman who had nothing left, standing in front of an empty pantry, praying for food. The next day, a stranger arrived with a basket of fresh vegetables, not knowing why he had felt led to that very house. She saw a sick child in a remote village, his family unable to access medical care. Yet, an elderly woman in the community, trained in herbal medicine, stepped forward and nursed him back to health. Time and time again, Bella saw divine provision. Food appearing when it was needed, protection in moments of danger, miraculous healings. "These are the ones who will endure," the voice said, "not by their own strength, but by the faith that sustains them." The next part of Bella's vision was unlike anything she had ever imagined. She saw churches, homes, and secret meeting places filled with people. In places where faith had once been fading, it was now rising stronger than ever. People who had once ignored spiritual matters were now desperate for truth. Those who had taken the mark and felt its emptiness were searching for something more. And those who had always believed found their faith tested, but stronger than before. Bella saw stadiums, not filled with concerts or sporting events, but with people gathered in worship, praying and seeking answers. She saw underground churches in countries where faith had once been suppressed, now thriving, their numbers growing daily. She saw miracles, blind eyes opening, the lame walking, people healed of diseases that had no cure. These signs weren't for spectacle, but as a demonstration of divine power in a world that had been deceived. "Where darkness rises, light will shine even brighter," the voice said. Despite the growing control of the global system, people were waking up. They were questioning the narrative, searching for something deeper, and finding it in places they never expected. But not everyone welcomed this awakening. Bella saw how the world reacted to those who refused to comply. At first, they were mocked, called conspiracists, extremists, or simply outdated. Then they were ostracized, banned from social spaces, unable to participate in normal society. And then, the real persecution began. Bella saw news broadcasts labeling these people as dangerous, a threat to progress. She saw workplaces forcing employees to choose between their job and the system. She saw people arrested simply for gathering in prayer groups. Yet, even in the face of persecution, their faith did not break. Some were taken from their families, others forced into hiding, yet they did not waver. "These are the days of testing," the voice said, "but those who endure will receive the greatest reward." Bella watched as small groups continued to resist, not through violence, but through faith. They did not retaliate, did not seek revenge. Instead, they forgave, they prayed for those who persecuted them, and they held on to their hope. She saw leaders emerging from unexpected places, young people, elders, former skeptics now leading communities in faith. They will stand when others fall, the voice said. Bella felt a deep sorrow for those who suffered, but at the same time, she understood. This was not punishment. This was refinement, a separation between those who truly believed and those who only followed when it was easy. The final part of this vision showed something even more astonishing. Bella saw that, despite the suffering, those who refused the mark were not alone. She saw moments of divine intervention, doors unlocking on their own when believers were imprisoned, food appearing in times of famine, storms disrupting forces sent to capture those in hiding. She saw an invisible shield around certain homes and villages, places where people gathered in faith. Those who sought to harm them simply couldn't find them, as if they had been hidden from sight. The hand of God will cover them, the voice said. Though the world rejects them, heaven will not abandon them. Bella felt overwhelmed by what she had seen. The power of faith, the resilience of those who refused to conform, the undeniable presence of divine protection. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. The world was changing, and a great choice was coming for everyone. And just as suddenly as she had arrived in this vision, Bella felt herself being pulled back. The light faded, the sounds dimmed, and she gasped as she opened her eyes. She was back in her hospital bed, doctors rushing around her. But she knew she couldn't stay silent. She had seen the truth, and now she had to tell the world. As Bella lay in her hospital bed, struggling to process what she had seen, her mind was flooded with the final moments of her vision. Just before she was pulled back, the voice had shown her something shocking, something she never expected. The system that had seemed so powerful, so unstoppable, had begun to crack. It started with whispers, quiet at first, but growing louder. People who had once embraced the new order were beginning to question it. They saw the consequences of their choices, the emptiness, the control, the loss of true freedom. Then the cracks widened. Governments that had eagerly adopted the mark found themselves facing unrest. Some of their own leaders turned against them, refusing to enforce stricter regulations. The world was not as unified as it had seemed. Bella saw entire regions rebelling, their citizens rejecting the digital system, breaking away and creating their own ways to trade and survive. She saw protests in major cities, ordinary people realizing they had given up too much. But the most shocking moment was when she saw the face of the world leader, the man who had first introduced the mark. He looked different now, worn, desperate. The charm and power he once held had faded. His speeches were no longer met with silence and obedience. They were met with anger, defiance. The world was waking up. Then came the collapse, a total failure of the digital control grid. Systems crashed, surveillance shut down, people regained access to their own choices. The truth cannot be hidden forever, the voice told her. Every false kingdom will fall. Bella then saw a world that had changed, not into chaos, but into something new, something real. The people who had resisted, who had relied on faith instead of control, were thriving in ways she never imagined. It wasn't about technology or wealth. It was about community. She saw villages, towns, even cities where people had formed new ways of living. They farmed together, built homes for one another, traded goods without the need for digital approval. But the most powerful thing she saw was the way they prayed. She saw entire communities coming together, lifting their hands to the sky, seeking guidance not from world leaders, but from something greater. She saw miracles, healings, protections, food appearing when there was none. She saw people once divided by race, background, even old rivalries, now standing together in unity. They had survived the greatest test of faith, and in doing so, had found something stronger than fear. Bella understood now. It had never been about hiding, about running. It was about standing firm, about holding on to faith even when the world tried to take it away. The power was always in them, the voice said. They only needed to remember. Before Bella was pulled back, the voice spoke one last time. Tell them what you have seen, not to cause fear, but to prepare them. Bella knew now that she had been shown both the dangers and the hope of the future. She had seen what would happen if people surrendered to control, but she had also seen what was possible if they stood firm. She had seen a world of fear, but also a world of faith. The choice will come for all, the voice continued. Tell them to choose wisely. She didn't understand why she had been chosen for this message. She wasn't a prophet. She wasn't a preacher. She was just a woman, a mother, a business owner. But now she had a mission. She had to share what she had seen. Just before the vision ended, Bella was given one last glimpse of the future. It wasn't clear, not like the other parts. It was as if she were seeing multiple possibilities, multiple paths. In one, she saw a world that had fully accepted control, where no one questioned the system anymore. People moved through life like shadows, existing but not living. The fire of free will had been extinguished. But in another, she saw something different. She saw people rejecting fear, standing up, reclaiming their right to live freely, to worship, to choose their own paths. She saw families rebuilding, communities growing stronger, and a light spreading across the earth that could not be dimmed. The voice left her with a simple statement. The future is not set. It will be shaped by the choices of today. And then, in an instant, it was over. Bella gasped as she felt the weight of her body again. The sounds of machines beeping filled her ears. The bright fluorescent lights of the hospital room stung her eyes. She was back. Her husband was at her side, clutching her hand, his face filled with relief. Doctors rushed in, stunned that she had regained consciousness. They had told her family to prepare for the worst, that even if she survived, she might never fully recover. But Bella knew better. She had been sent back for a reason. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Her husband gave her water, his hands shaking. "You've been out for days," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought we lost you." Bella looked around, still struggling to process everything. But one thing was clear. She couldn't keep this to herself. She had seen too much. She had been given a message, and now she had to deliver it. As Bella lay in the hospital bed, slowly regaining her strength, her mind was still racing with what she had seen. She knew that what she had witnessed was not just a prophecy, it was a warning. The future was not set in stone. The world still had a choice. The voice's final words echoed in her soul. The future is not shaped by the powerful, but by the choices of the ordinary. And yet, Bella felt a deep, unsettling fear, not for herself, but for the world. She knew how easily people could be lulled into comfort, how quickly they could forget. If people didn't take this message seriously, if they simply ignored it, the world would slide into compliance without resistance. She saw a vision of people who had once resisted but later gave in, exhausted by the struggle. Some had initially refused the mark, but eventually accepted it, telling themselves it was harmless, just a convenience. She saw families who had stood firm, now divided, parents who had held on to their faith, watching their children choose the easy path. The greatest danger, the voice had said, is not fear, but forgetfulness. Bella realized that this message wasn't just about resisting a system of control. It was about never becoming too comfortable, never assuming that freedom was guaranteed. It had to be protected. As she lay there, she whispered a promise to herself. "I won't forget." But how could she make sure others wouldn't forget either? As soon as Bella was strong enough to sit up, she asked for a notebook. The doctors and nurses thought it was strange, but her husband brought one to her without question. She had to write everything down before the details faded. Every vision, every word spoken to her, every country that resisted, every warning about the future. It had to be recorded. When she was discharged from the hospital, she felt a sense of urgency. She couldn't waste time. She started telling people, her family, her friends, anyone who would listen. At first, many were skeptical. Some dismissed it as a hallucination, a near-death delusion. But others felt something stir within them. As she spoke, Bella saw their eyes change, some filled with curiosity, others with fear, and some with understanding. They knew something was happening in the world. They felt it. The changes, the growing sense of unease, the way technology and society were shifting in ways that didn't feel natural. And the more she spoke, the more people wanted to know. She was invited to share her experience at a church, then another, then small community groups. Soon, strangers were reaching out to her, asking for guidance, asking how to prepare. The message was spreading. Bella realized something. She didn't have to force anyone to believe her. The truth had a way of planting itself in people's hearts. They just needed to hear it. The choice would always be theirs. As months passed, Bella saw the ripple effect of her testimony. Families began making small changes, storing food, learning old skills, preparing for a world where reliance on digital systems might not be safe. Churches began having conversations about faith under pressure, discussing what it meant to stand firm when society turned against believers. But the most powerful thing Bella saw was how people were reconnecting with each other. Neighbors who barely spoke before were now checking in on one another, forming small support groups. People were coming together, not just for survival, but to build something real, something stronger than fear. Bella received messages from people across the country, even from other parts of the world. Some had dreams similar to hers, others had been feeling an unexplained urgency to prepare. She realized that she wasn't alone in this. The voice had been right. This was not about one person. It was about ordinary people making choices that would shape the future.